If life is a dream, the dream is also a life. Imagine being in the midst of a dream. The world around you shimmers with a life of its own, pulsing with emotion, rich with sensory detail. Then, a shift occurs. A spark of awareness pierces through the dream's immersive flow. This is a dream. I'm dreaming. The interesting thing is that this recognition doesn't shatter the dream's spell. You don't wake up from the dream. The world you're experiencing continues to unfold around you, yet now it's colored by a peculiar double awareness. The immersive reality of the dream itself coexists with the conscious understanding that it's a dream. You are both participant and observer, swept along by the dream's current, while simultaneously recognizing its Oneiric nature. This uncanny experience challenges our usual way in which we separate the real from the unreal, and reveals a strange tension at the heart of both our dreaming and waking life. If the dream is an illusion, a fleeting figment of the imagination, why does it feel so undeniably real while we are within it? The vivid emotions, the convincing details, the sense of presence, all point to a power that the imaginary holds over us, a power to shape and even constitute our experience of reality. Yet, the very fact that we can recognize ourselves as dreaming suggests a connection to a reality that lies beyond the dream, a reality that somehow frames and gives rise to the dream's illusory world. This tension between the real and the imaginary, so strikingly apparent in the dream within the dream, echoes a deeper uncertainty that pervades even our waking experience. The French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty calls our attention to a persistent hint of unreality. This feeling of things being unreal often goes unnoticed in the rush of everyday life, but it can resurge and surprise us momentarily. The transcendence of the far-off encroaches upon my present, and brings a hint of unreality even into the experiences with which I believe myself to coincide. This hint of unreality arises because the world is never simply a collection of inert objects out there. Even our most basic perception is shaped by a kind of primordial symbolism, an intertwining of meaning that precedes our conscious grasp. The perceived world is lived out before we can think it, Merleau-Ponty writes. Our experience is always already steeped in a silent logic that speaks through our senses, our bodies, and the very texture of the world itself. The dream, with its fluid transformations and unexpected juxtapositions, throws this pre-reflective dimension of experience into sharp relief. Perhaps, Merleau-Ponty suggests, the distinction we make between the real and the imaginary is not as absolute as we tend to believe. The distinction between the real and the Oneiric cannot be identical with the simple distinction between consciousness filled with meaning and consciousness given up to its own void. The two modalities impinge on one another. Our waking relations with objects and others especially have an Oneiric character as a matter of principle. Others are present to us in the way that dreams are, the way myths are, and this is enough to question the cleavage between the real and the imaginary. This impingement, this intertwining of the real and the Oneiric, points to a more fundamental dimension of experience, one that Merleau-Ponty calls the imaginary texture of the real and the flesh of the imaginary. It's a dimension that is constantly at play in our perception, shaping the way we make sense of the world and our place within it. Dreams, then, are not at all escapist fantasies or meaningless diversions. They reveal the imaginal meaning that runs through all our experience, that the Oneiric is not as a separate realm, but a fundamental texture woven into the fabric of reality itself. In exploring the nature of dreams, we are, in fact, exploring the very heart of what it means to be awake to the world. Western thought has long been haunted by a tendency to carve the world into neat categories, to establish firm boundaries between what is real and what is illusory. This dualistic habit of mind, as Merleau-Ponty and others have argued, has profoundly shaped our understanding of everything from the nature of knowledge to the relationship between mind and body. Perhaps nowhere is this dualism more apparent than in the traditional view of dreams. Dreams, often relegated to the realm of fantasy, are seen as fleeting, insubstantial, and ultimately disconnected from the solidity and significance of the real world. To overcome the chasm that this dualism has created between the night and the day, between dreaming and waking, to begin re-establishing a connection between these two severed worlds, the best approach that each individual can deploy right now is to journal and analyze their dreams. Ultimately, memory and understanding are the only tools that we have. To help you reconnect the divided worlds within yourself, we have put together a guided dream journal and are offering it to you for free. You'll find the link in the description. One of the most influential articulations of Western dualistic thinking can be found in the work of René Descartes. His mind-body dualism posits a fundamental split between the thinking substance of the mind and the extended substance of the body. This split has had a lasting impact on how we understand ourselves and our place in the world, often leading to a privileging of reason and intellect over the realms of embodiment, imagination, and feeling. Later, in the 20th century, Jean-Paul Sartre, Merleau-Ponty's close associate, though they often disagreed, further solidified this separation by characterizing the imaginary as a kind of nothingness, annihilation, a lack of being in contrast to the solidity and presence of the real. Merleau-Ponty critiques Sartre's depiction of the imaginary, arguing that it fails to capture the lived experience of imagination. Error of Sartre's The Imaginary, describing imagining consciousness as nihilation. That's why Sartre didn't describe in The Imaginary what is imagining in the image. He showed why it is not real or a true presence. He did not show by what it is an imaginary presence or a quasi-presence. For Sartre at this stage of his thinking, the imaginary was essentially an escape from the demands of the real, a retreat into a world of wish fulfillment and self-deception. Merleau-Ponty, influenced by the phenomenological insights of Edmund Husserl, offers a radical reinterpretation of the imaginary. Merleau-Ponty criticizes the dualistic habit of thinking that leads us to extend the separation of the imaginary and the real to a split between the sleeping, imagining mind and the waking, rational mind. This separation, Merleau-Ponty insists, is artificial and ultimately distorts our understanding of both the imaginary and the real. Central to Merleau-Ponty's project is a shift in focus from abstract categories to the lived world of experience. He emphasizes the primacy of perception, arguing that we encounter the world not as disembodied minds, but as embodied beings who are always already immersed in a field of meaning. The perceived world pre-exists any attempt to understand it. It is experienced prior to intellectual reflection or scientific explanation. The world is not a neutral object of contemplation, but a living field of significance that we actively participate in and co-shape. The primacy of perception leads Merleau-Ponty to place crucial importance on the lived body, not as a mere physical object, but as the very medium through which we experience and make sense of the world. Our perception is not passive reception of data, but active, embodied engagement with a world that already speaks to us through our senses, our movements, and our felt sense of being. The body, Merleau-Ponty argues, is the hinge between self and world, present in both our dreaming and waking experiences. As he writes, the dream starts from the lived body, just as waking perception does. This shared ground of the lived body is what allows the imaginary to impinge on the real and vice versa. To understand this, we need to grasp what Merleau-Ponty means by the lived body. It is not simply the physical body as understood by biology or anatomy. It is rather our pre-reflective embodied experience of being in the world. It is through the lived body that we perceive, move, feel, and make sense of the world around us. The lived body is the hinge between self and world, the site where meaning is constantly being generated. Dreams, in this sense, can be seen as a kind of embodied imagination, a way of exploring and expressing our being in the world through a different logic of sensation, image, and symbol. Their bodily origin is what allows them to reveal the ambiguity of meaning that is always already operating within our experience, challenging the rigid categories of the dualistic worldview. To better understand the intertwining of the real and the imaginary in dreams, we will turn to the phenomenological insights of Edmund Husserl, particularly his concept of intentionality. Intentionality, for Husserl, is the defining feature of consciousness. Consciousness is always about something, always directed towards an object. Even in the seemingly unreal realm of dreams, our consciousness is not simply a blank slate or a chaotic jumble of sensations. It is structured by intentionality, by the directedness of our awareness towards a world. Within his framework of intentionality, Husserl makes a crucial distinction between two modes of synthesis that operate within consciousness: passive and active synthesis. Passive synthesis refers to the constant pre-reflective flow of perceptions, sensations, and associations that form the background of our experience. It is a kind of primordial wellspring of experience, a field of constituting multiplicities, as Susie Ferrarello puts it, from which our more focused awareness emerges. Imagine, for example, walking through a bustling city street. Your senses are bombarded with sights, sounds, smells, and tactile impressions, a swirling kaleidoscope of stimuli that you don't consciously attend to individually. This is the realm of passive synthesis, a constant flow of potentialities that constantly unfolds around us. Active synthesis, on the other hand, is the act of focusing our attention, grasping a particular object from the flow of passive synthesis, and giving it meaning. It is through active synthesis that we move from a vague awareness of our surroundings to a more precise and deliberate engagement with the world. For instance, amidst the sensory overload of the city street, your attention might be drawn to a particular sound, a street musician playing a haunting melody. As you turn towards the music, listen intently, and perhaps even identify the song, you are engaging in active synthesis. You are selecting a specific object from the field of passive intentionality, bringing it into sharper focus, and assigning it a meaning within your experience. As Husserl writes, active synthesis establishes this being as valid for me from now on. Active synthesis thus brings a coherence and a unity to our experience, from out of the undistinct multiplicity of passive synthesis. If we return to the experience of recognizing oneself as dreaming, we can analyze it through the lens of Husserl's framework. The dream itself, with its narrative flow, its vivid imagery, and its emotional charge, is the product of passive synthesis. These elements arise spontaneously, without conscious control, from the depths of our embodied being. The dream unfolds around us, drawing us into its world, without requiring deliberate effort or conscious direction on our part. The moment of recognizing this is a dream, however, involves a flicker of active synthesis within this passively constituted world. It is a moment in which a part of consciousness steps back from the immediate flow of experience, grasps the dream as an object, and assigns it a meaning. This is not real, it is a dream. This act of recognition, however fleeting, reveals the presence of a more reflective, self-aware dimension of consciousness that can operate even within the dream state. What makes this experience so intriguing is that the shift from passive to active synthesis is often incomplete. The recognition of dreaming doesn't necessarily dispel the dream world. Instead, the two modes of experience, the immersive flow of the dream and the reflective awareness of dreaming, can coexist, revealing a kind of overlapping of intentional landscapes within consciousness. The dream continues to unfold. We remain caught up in its logic, even as a part of us stands apart, knowing it to be a dream. This suggests that the boundary between the passively constituted world of the dream and the actively constituted world of waking perception is more fluid and porous than we might assume. By taking the imaginary seriously, Merleau-Ponty moves beyond the traditional philosophical frameworks of realism and idealism. Both of these perspectives, in different ways, seek to find a fixed and absolute ground for reality. Realism locates this ground in the external world, assuming a mind-independent reality that we can access through objective observation. This perspective often leads to a privileging of scientific knowledge and a devaluation of subjective experience. Idealism, on the other hand, grounds reality in the mind, asserting that the world is ultimately a product of our ideas and perceptions. While idealism acknowledges the importance of subjectivity, it can risk reducing reality to a mere projection of the mind, neglecting the world's resistance and alterity. Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology of the imaginary challenges both these foundationalist assumptions by refusing to choose between a world out there and a world in here. He argues that the real and the imaginary are not separate realms but are fundamentally intertwined, forming a chiasm, a crossing or intertwining, as he often puts it. This is what he means by the imaginary texture of the real, a phrase that captures the way in which the imaginary is not merely an addition to reality, but is rather a constitutive dimension of it, a force that shapes our perception, our understanding, and our possibilities for action. The imaginary is the internal double of things descending into them, the vision turned inside out, what interiorly lines it, descending into the visible. It is through the imaginary, Merleau-Ponty suggests, that we can begin to grasp the world not as a collection of inert objects but as a living field of meaning, a dynamic interplay of forces that constantly calls forth our participation. To better understand the imaginary and the way it manifests in dreams, we can take the profound example of art. Artists do not simply copy or represent the world, as a naive realist might assume, nor do they merely project their subjective fantasies onto a blank canvas, as a simplistic idealist might suggest. Rather, they engage in a kind of transmutation of the real, drawing upon the world's imaginary texture to re-embody meaning in new and unexpected ways. As Merleau-Ponty writes, "It is too little to say that a being is on the surface of the canvas as an image or essence. It is there as itself, as that which was always most alive about it." Art, like the imaginary, is not an escape from reality, but a way of revealing its depth and vitality, its power to move and transform us. The artist, attuned to the flesh of the imaginary, doesn't simply reproduce what is already visible, nor create something out of the blue that was previously invisible. Rather, the artist, like the dreamer, delves into the unseen, the unspoken, the internal double that underpins the world of appearances. A painting of a mountain, for example, is not just a depiction of a physical object, but can also evoke a sense of the mountain's enduring presence, its geological history, its symbolic significance within a culture, its power to inspire awe and wonder. Art, in this sense, functions like a dream, disrupting our habitual ways of seeing and opening us up to the Oneiric symbolic texture of reality. Our bodies, our senses, and our imaginative capacities are all attuned to this symbolic dimension, drawing meaning from the world and projecting it back onto it in an ongoing cycle of exchange. The painting, by breaking the skin of things, shows how the things become things, how the world becomes world. Dreams offer a unique pathway into the Oneiric nature of being itself. They reveal a reality that is not fixed or static, but constantly emerging through the dynamic interplay of perception, imagination, and interpretation. This understanding of the Oneiric texture of reality has profound implications for how we live our lives. It calls us to cultivate an openness to ambiguity and uncertainty, recognizing that the world is not always as clear-cut or predictable as we might wish it to be. Embracing the Oneiric means embracing the fluidity and dynamism of meaning, the shifting perspectives, the unexpected connections, and the hint of unreality that lingers at the edges of even our most immediate experiences. Recognizing the imaginary as a fundamental dimension of reality necessitates recognizing and fostering creativity in all its forms. Creativity is not simply the domain of artists or dreamers. It is a vital force that runs through all our endeavors, shaping our perceptions, our relationships, and our ways of being in the world. To cultivate creativity is to cultivate an attentiveness to the imaginary fabric of the real, to be open to the unexpected, to embrace the symbolic dimension of experience, and to find ways of expressing the richness and complexity of our embodied lives. And it is precisely here that practices like dream journaling and reflection become essential. By recording and reflecting on our dreams, we create a tangible link between these two modalities of experience. We help connect the creativity of the dream world and the creativity of waking awareness. If you want to begin such a process, we have created a dream journaling app which will initiate you to the practice of analysis and interpretation. You can try it by following the link in the description. Ultimately, overcoming the division between dreaming and waking involves cultivating a more attentive, embodied way of being in the world. It is a matter of learning to listen to the silent language of the real, not listening as a passive receptivity, but as an active engagement with the world, a willingness to be moved, transformed, and drawn into the ongoing dance of meaning-making that constitutes our shared reality. To awaken to the Oneiric is to awaken to the mystery and beauty of a world that is always more than it appears, a world that is constantly inviting us to participate in its unfolding. It is to recognize our own role as co-creators of meaning, and to embrace the ethical responsibility that comes with shaping the imaginary texture of the world we inhabit.